Hey there, multi-prep teachers. You know how professional development never seems to quite get to what we need? It's like, great idea, but how do I make this work when I have 3+ preps to juggle? That's exactly why I created the Simplify Your Preps Collective. It's a free Facebook group built just for teachers like you, where we share tips, resources, and real talk about making multi-prep teaching less overwhelming and more doable. Sound like your kind of space? Head to kristenmasick.com/collective and join us today. Let's simplify together. Welcome back to our end of the year series where we are featuring the top 5 episodes that were downloaded in 2024. Today we are at the episode that was the 3rd highest listened to, and it is episode 231, 5 game-changing hacks for teachers. Welcome to the Secondary Teacher Podcast, the podcast for middle and high school teachers juggling multiple preps to get strategies to reduce overwhelm so that you don't have to choose between being an effective teacher and prioritizing important relationships. I'm your host, Kristen Masick, a 10-year high school engineering teacher, former middle school assistant principal, and teacher coach. Every week, we will discuss strategies, systems, and time-saving tips to help you not only survive but thrive as a multiple prep teacher. When I think of a hack, it is usually being able to do something that saves time or that's easy and that gives a pretty good and big return. So today we're going to be talking about some teaching hacks that I have learned over the years as being a high school engineering teacher, but then also being an administrator. This first hack we are going to talk about was probably the biggest game changer in my teaching career. I wish I would have done it sooner, and it is student conferences. This can look a few different ways. How I did it in my class is once a term, or actually a couple times a term. So I would do it at the beginning, midterm, and at the end of the term. I would conference with each one of my students. When we were conferencing, they were doing self-reported grades. What was great was that I was able to sit down with every single one of my students, ask them how things were going, if there were things they were struggling with, and we could connect. What I will say though is doing this in this method that I did when I was teaching does take a lot of time. If you are wanting to do this, be strategic in how and when you do it. It will probably take a few class periods to get through all of your students. Even if you're on the block schedule, it is going to take a while. Planning some sort of self-directed activity or project that students could be working on really worked out well. Work days were great days for me to have my conferences. Jared has implemented this as well in his classroom, and it looks different than what I have done. He has a question of the day. He writes it up on the board, and he is expecting that all of his students answer the question of the day to him at some point during the class. As they are working in the shop, they come up to him and answer the question of the day. His questions are very get to know you type questions, not content based, because the idea is to get to know students and have a conversation with students that may not be applicable to your content area or your class. And I think that's what is so valuable about these particular conferences, especially if you're teaching high school, is just having students get comfortable speaking with adults and gives them an opportunity to share some feedback from the class, and then also gives you an opportunity to see how they are doing and to check in. The other great thing that I loved about conferencing was that this is when I could have conversations with students if there were any behavior issues, and no one else knew. None of the other students had any idea that I was essentially disciplining students. So then students weren't intentionally acting out so that they could get my attention and go out into the hall and wait for me. I would just consult with them or talk with them, or we'd work things out while we were in our conferences. No one had a clue what was happening within those conversations. So it led to less instances of misbehavior for the intention of getting additional attention from me. That is my first hack, creating ways for you to conference or get to know each of your students individually. Now, my next hack is something that you probably have heard quite a bit about, having a bell ringer. But it wasn't until I was an administrator that I realized why we should have bell ringers. When I first started teaching and was told to have bell ringers, it was more of like a mandate, similar to being required to write your objectives on the board. It felt like a hoop to jump through. When an admin came into our room, we should have that going, and if they didn't see it, then we were going to get written up. But in reality, it saves you so many classroom management issues. That I don't think is what has been explained very well to teachers. But why you would want to use bell ringers, first off, it is so important for you to greet your students at the door. And once again, this is coming from my admin hat, my admin lens. Being out in the hall and being a presence just by your door will eliminate or reduce issues that happen in the hall. Just having more adults in the hall really helps your admin, and your admin love to see you out there as well. The students will do less shenanigans in the hall when you are there. So it's important for you to be out there when you can. Greeting your students as they come in by name is also very important. The only way that you can really do that and be successful is to have something for your students to do when they get in. Because if they get into your room and they're waiting for you, then what are they going to do? They're going to mess around, or they're going to get on their phones. So having a bell ringer, having some sort of routine protocol that they do the moment they walk into your room, they know what to do, they know to sit down, there's whatever you've got going on the board, and they can get right to it. There are a couple different ways that you can do bell ringers that have been fairly successful for teachers that I've worked with. The first one is to have a question, and it could be a question from the day before, or you could have it be questions that relate to your content, but it could be like a pre-assessment for what they're going to be learning that day. You also could do something that has to do with careers or their future. I've also seen it really successful where you have done a brain teaser, something to get their brains warmed up, something they can be successful in. I recently heard a math teacher at a summit who was talking about how she does those types of questions so that students will already feel successful at the beginning of class, even if they were absent the day before. Just think about some of those things you could do that way. You could also have the same question every single day, so the same sentence stem or something similar that just asks them to review the previous day. Maybe they are to remember a couple of things that they learned the previous class period, and then you're going to share it out. The other great thing about a bell ringer is when you are switching your classes, you have whatever the passing time is. There's no way you are going to feel like you can stand at the door and greet students and do all of that. But the way that you can still do that is when you have a bell ringer that takes about 5 minutes, then you get 5 minutes to breathe or get ready for the next class after the class has already started. So instead of trying to beat the bell with that minimal passing time, you can greet your students and then use the next 5 minutes to ease into the next class or next prep. Also, with that too, I would try to have as much of the transition done by your students as possible, so you are not the one having to frantically switch things over. This next hack is super simple to do, and I wish more teachers from an admin perspective did this more frequently. It is to get ahead of what has been going on in your classroom with your parents sooner. For example, the moment an issue starts to arise, not a big issue, just even a little tiny issue, if you are able to get a hold of parents and let them know that you had an issue in class. Maybe you even have already resolved it, but you just want them to know that there was an issue in class. Perhaps someone has gotten behind on turning in their homework or took a big dip in in an assessment, or maybe they were just talking incessantly during class, just letting the parents know ahead of time where you've already resolved it with the student and it's not an issue right now. It gives the parents a heads up, because if something comes down the road and it ends up being bigger, you have already reached out to the parents and addressed that behavior or issue ahead of time. The worst, especially as an admin, was having to call a parent come in who was distraught because something had happened in the class. It had been going on for weeks, maybe months. This issue kept getting bigger. And the first time that the parent ever heard about it was when there was something big, like that teacher wanted that student removed from the class. It came out of left field for the parent. They had no idea there were any issues occurring in the class. Unfortunately, this happens more often than not. As a teacher, I hated calling parents. I don't know why, but I just got really nervous about it, not knowing how they would react. As an assistant principal, I had to get over that really quickly because I was constantly calling parents. And of course, I was always the bearer of bad news. I wish I would have been much better as a teacher. So this is what I'm telling you right now. Get to know your parents more, or have them get to know you. Maybe in your initial email, you have a video so that parents know that you are human and they see you introduce yourself. Maybe you are just contacting home more frequently. That is going to help you mitigate different issues when you discuss things with parents sooner, so that it doesn't end up being a big thing. My next thing is to put things on a calendar. Anytime you make an assignment, put the due date on the calendar. One way is Google Calendar. You can have a Google Calendar and each class is a different color, so you can tell what's happening. When you are about to sign something, put the due date on the calendar so that you are not piling up all of your due dates on the same day. So you are being self-conscious about what your load will be during that season. Feel free to shift things to make it so that your load is spread out versus all occurring on the same weekday or weekend. I always like to have a calendar in my room so that I could visually see things. So whether that is a desk calendar or a wall calendar, you can get a 24x36 calendar and print it out inexpensively at a big printing place. You might even be able to get your school district to do this, but they use a large format printer. They print out the calendar and then you can write everything on that. So not only can you see it, but your students can see it as well, so they know what is coming. I have one in my Teachers Pay Teachers store, so I will link that in the show notes. But there are different ways that you can do that to have that calendar visually remind you of due dates and help you and your students out. And my final hack is using AI. This is pretty much my new favorite thing to make things easier. We had talked about bell ringers. You can use AI to write your bell ringers, come up with general questions, career questions, specific content questions, review questions, so you aren't having to spend a ton of time and the mental load. The other thing I love doing, I've talked about it before, is curriculum mapping, lesson planning, how to repurpose different protocols for your various classes. I just love being able to use AI to lessen the load and make it a lot easier to be a teacher, especially at this point in time. As we wrap up, I just wanted to review my 5 favorite hacks. The first is student conferences. Next, having a bell ringer. Third, being proactive with parents. Fourth, having some sort of calendar and making sure that you are marking what is coming up. Finally, using AI. if today's episode was helpful to you, it could be for others. So make sure to share it with a colleague, and you can also tag me on Instagram at Kristen Masick, KRistnMassic. Until next week.